My name is Lucas Madison. I was 18, sweaty from basketball practice, earbuds still humming in my ears as I boarded that nearly empty subway car. The summer air outside had been thick and warm, but inside the train the air conditioning rattled cold, a chill that made me tug my jacket closer. I typed a quick message to my mom: be home in 30, the kind of everyday promise you never imagined might be your last. They entered at the next stop. Two boys not much older than me, but their eyes were hollowed out by something darker than time could explain. One was tall, all bones and shadows, track marks tattooing his arms. The other was shorter, stocky, with a gaze that looked more like dead glass than living sight. The taller one closed the space between us, demanding my phone. His friend blocked the exit, cutting off any thought of escape. My hesitation lasted a single beat too long. His shove slammed me against the metal wall, and then fists were raining down ribs, cheek, skull. The train lurched, my head cracked against the pole, and the world unraveled in blackness. The last fragments I recall were blood wetting my shirt and the shrill cry of brakes. Then nothing. On the platform, police and paramedics gathered over what was left of me. I was told later that my pulse faltered, stopped, returned, then failed again. In the ambulance, my heart flickered out, and in the hospital emergency room, it silenced altogether. 14 long minutes passed where machines screamed my death. But while my body lay broken, something deeper in me was being drawn upward. There was no tunnel, no white light like the stories I'd heard growing up. Instead, I felt weightless, released from the crushing pain, lifted like a whisper through invisible hands. The hospital room shrank below me, then dissolved completely. I opened my eyes to what can only be described as a cosmic cathedral, an observatory made not of steel but of living light. Galaxies whirled in silence around me, their colors pulsing like heartbeats. The floor beneath my feet shimmered with crystallized starlight, solid yet transparent, and the air itself vibrated with a hum that reached through my bones. Every sense was alive beyond measure. The taste of light was sweet on my tongue. The air carried a scent that reminded me of rain and fire and purity all at once. My skin tingled as though it had been wrapped in music. And my ears heard a harmony, faint at first, swelling into something like 1,000 choirs singing one note that held all notes within it. And then him, Jesus, stood before me, not the gentle image painted in churches, not the statues I'd seen with their frozen serenity. His presence shifted like flame, like light itself deciding to take shape, then shifting again into something more radiant, more true than any earthly reality. His eyes were eternity itself. Looking into them, I felt every hidden memory of my short life, every secret thought, every selfish moment. My shame rose up like a tidal wave, ready to crush me. But his gaze didn't condemn, it loved. It loved so deeply that my chest broke open with sobs I didn't know I had the capacity to weep. You've been brought here to witness, to remember. That's what I heard, not through ears, but directly into the marrow of my being. I knew in that moment I hadn't been abandoned. My death wasn't the end, it was an opening. The emotion that seized me in that instant was awe, pure and paralyzing awe. Awe that such holiness could embrace someone like me, a boy bleeding on a subway floor. Awe that my broken story had drawn the attention of the Creator, and awe that what I thought was my end was only His beginning. A single tidbit remains etched into my memory from that first encounter: the realization that every breath we take is already borrowed, already mercy. I had never once considered my next heartbeat a gift until the moment I had none, and in that strange, luminous space, I knew I would never again breathe without gratitude. I felt myself drawn deeper into that realm, as if Jesus was guiding me without moving, his presence both still and endless. The cosmic observatory stretched far beyond sight, galaxies spiraling in slow, deliberate beauty. I stood barefoot on the starlit floor, and each step echoed like chimes ringing across eternity. My lungs filled with air that wasn't air, but pure life, saturating every cell. It was then that I realized I was not dreaming. I was not hallucinating. What surrounded me was more real than anything I had ever touched on Earth. The light was not just brightness, it was being. The sound was not just vibration, it was truth sung into existence. Every detail radiated purpose, and every purpose pointed back to Him. Jesus' form pulsed between light and flesh, shifting with a rhythm that felt like the heartbeat of creation. One moment, he was a figure I could almost approach, radiant yet human, and the next, he dissolved into brilliance so overwhelming I could not look directly without trembling. Yet, through it all, his eyes never changed. They held me, and in them I saw both the infinite distance between us and the unbreakable bridge of his love that closed it. He raised his hand, and without words I knew I was being invited to see. My vision expanded outward, as though the walls of the observatory melted away. Suddenly I was looking down on the earth, suspended in the vast canvas of space. Blue oceans shimmered, green forests breathed, cities glowed like clusters of fireflies against the night. But what gripped me most wasn't the physical planet, it was what pulsed beneath the surface. I saw currents of light and rivers of shadow flowing across continents. They weren't visible to human eyes, but they were the truest forces shaping everything. The light moved like golden threads, weaving connections between people, families, churches, nations, and the shadows slithered in, whispering lies, severing bonds, choking hope. Behold, the voice of Jesus resonated in my core. This is the battle that has always been, the war between love and hate, forgiveness and bitterness, truth and lies. You must see not with human sight, but with eternal eyes. The awe I had felt before was now joined by a wave of reverence so deep it brought me to my knees. I touched the starlit floor, and even that touch felt like touching holiness. The music that filled the observatory swelled, not as sound alone, but as meaning. Each note seemed to carry an entire universe of truth. Then he directed my gaze closer, away from the global streams, and toward something painfully personal. I saw my own life laid out like a tapestry, every thread visible, my laughter on the basketball court, my quiet moments at home, even the restless thoughts I'd hidden from everyone. I saw my mother's prayers woven in golden light, each whispered word strengthening the bonds of protection around me. I saw the weight of my father's sacrifices, the golden cords of provision and care he had carried even when tired. And I saw my sister's innocence, her smile glowing like a lantern in the dark. But I also saw every time I had chosen selfishness, the lies I had told, the anger I had hidden, the bitterness I had nursed over small slights. Nothing was concealed. Everything was laid bare. And yet the gaze of Jesus didn't flinch. His eyes were like fire that burned away pretense, but also like water that quenched shame. I understood for the first time that divine judgment wasn't the crushing gavel I had feared. It was truth, pure truth, paired with a love so relentless that even my failures became invitations to be healed. The tidbit of wisdom that carved itself into me then was this: nothing in our lives is wasted. Every wound, every mistake, every choice can either become fuel for the shadows or be redeemed into threads of light. What determines which way it bends is simple: whether we release it into his hands. The emotion that dominated me in this section of my journey was humility. Not the false humility of pretending I was unworthy, but the real humility of standing before infinite greatness and realizing that greatness had bent low to love me. I had been a boy gasping for breath on a train, but in his eyes I was something infinitely precious. I wanted to stay there forever, to dissolve into the music and the galaxies. But Jesus was not finished. His eyes deepened, and I knew he was about to show me something far harder, far more personal, something that would pierce me more deeply than any fist on that subway ever could. The light shifted again, and suddenly I was no longer standing in that cosmic hall, but drawn into what felt like a river of memory. It swept me through the fabric of my own life, every scene replaying not just as images, but as living experiences. I didn't just see them, I felt them. Every word I had spoken, every thought I had entertained, every choice I had made. It was a life review, but not the kind you imagine where a harsh judge tallies your failures. No, this was different. This was standing inside truth itself, where nothing could be hidden. Moments I had forgotten returned with crystal clarity. I was 5 years old, clutching a toy car, refusing to share with a neighbor boy who only wanted to play. I felt his disappointment, like a bruise on my own heart. I was 9, rolling my eyes at my mother's request for help, speaking words laced with disrespect. In that instant, I felt her weariness double, her spirit sag under the weight of my careless tone. I was 13, laughing at a cruel joke in the locker room, and suddenly I carried the sting of the boy who had been its target, his shame pressing into my own chest. Every selfish act was reflected back to me not as punishment, but as revelation. Jesus' eyes never left me, and in them I understood the consequence of every choice. Nothing was neutral. Every word, every action either breathed life or deepened the shadows. There was no middle ground. But then came the other side, the golden threads. I saw myself as a child, offering half my sandwich to a friend who forgot his lunch. I felt the warmth ripple outward, far beyond that single moment, touching others in ways I could not have known. I saw myself texting encouragement to a classmate after his father died. That one small message, which I'd nearly forgotten, had become a lifeline he clung to when he thought no one cared. I saw my laughter on the basketball court, bringing light to teammates who carried hidden burdens. The contrast was staggering. The shadows fed on every careless word, every selfish impulse, while the light multiplied every act of kindness, no matter how small. And yet, through it all, Jesus' gaze never carried condemnation. Instead, his love poured into me like a flood. It was as though he was saying, "Yes, this is who you have been, but it is not who you are destined to remain. My love is not blind to your faults, it transforms them." The emotion that engulfed me was brokenness, but not despair. It was the kind of brokenness that clears away pride, leaving only surrender. I wept, not out of fear, but because I had never known love like this existed. One tidbit of truth carved itself into my heart during that life review. Forgiveness is not just something you receive, it is something you release. I realized that many of my own wounds, the slights I had carried, the grudges I had held were poison I had chosen to drink. And if Jesus could love me, seeing everything laid bare, then I too could forgive. Not because others deserved it, but because love demanded it. At one point, I tried to avert my eyes, ashamed to face certain memories, but his gaze pulled me back. It was not harsh. It was steady, like a physician refusing to look away from the wound he intended to heal. I heard without words, "Do not fear the truth. Truth and love together are the scalpel that saves." The review slowed, and I was left trembling, my spirit emptied out, yet strangely free. It was as though the weight I hadn't realized I carried, the endless justifications, the quiet resentments, the unspoken fears had been lifted. What remained was clarity. And then Jesus' presence leaned closer, more intimate. The galaxies dimmed behind him, and I knew the next vision would not be about me, but about the ones who had broken me that night. My attackers. Marcus. Tommy. My heart clenched, but I couldn't turn away. He was about to show me the truth of their lives, and what I would see would break me in ways fists never could. The galaxies dimmed until they dissolved into something else entirely, and suddenly I was seeing not the cosmos, but the raw story of two broken boys. Jesus didn't speak at first, he simply opened my eyes, and I was made to witness. The tall one, Marcus. I saw him not as the attacker who shoved me against the subway wall, but as a toddler with wide, hungry eyes. His mother, just a teenager herself, was lost in the grip of heroin. He sat in a filthy apartment, waiting for food that never came, while she sold her body to feed her addiction. My heart twisted as I felt his loneliness, a hunger that went far beyond the stomach. By age 5, he was fending for himself, scavenging dumpsters while neighbors turned their eyes away. At 7, child services took him, but the foster home that received him was no sanctuary. The man who should have been protector became predator. Abuse, verbal, physical, even worse, shattered the child's spirit piece by piece. I felt every blow as though my own skin were torn, every insult like a lash against my soul. I wanted to cry out, to intervene, but I was trapped as a witness. By 12, Marcus had run from his 7th foster home, choosing the streets over cruelty. He slept under bridges, in abandoned cars, wherever the night would hide him. Older men preyed on his vulnerability, and drugs offered the only escape. The first time he put the needle into his arm, I felt the relief that wasn't relief, the numbness that masqueraded as peace. Violence soon became his only language, each fight a shield against more pain. And then the shorter one, Tommy. Outwardly, his life looked normal, a father, a mother, a suburban home, but the house itself was a chamber of terror. I saw him at 6, flinching under his father's fists, his mother silent, pretending not to see. I felt his desperation to be good enough, quiet enough, invisible enough to avoid the next outburst. When that failed, I saw him shift the violence onto his younger sister, repeating the cycle he had suffered. Shame and cruelty twisted together until he no longer knew the difference. Teachers reached out. Coaches tried to redirect his aggression. A girlfriend loved him despite his anger. A youth counselor spotted the signs and extended help. But the whispers around him told a different story. Don't trust. Don't hope. Strike first or be destroyed. He listened to the lies, because vulnerability felt more dangerous than hate. Jesus finally spoke, his voice heavy with sorrow that trembled through me. Both of them were children who tasted hell on earth long before they inflicted it on others. The darkness you see in their actions was not their true nature. It was the poison of trauma and lies, passed down, whispered into their ears until they could hear nothing else. And then I saw the golden threads. a kindergarten teacher who tucked an extra sandwich into Marcus's backpack, knowing he was hungry, a librarian who let him nap in the warmth of a reading room during winter nights, a street pastor offering food without strings attached, a doctor in the ER who spoke to him like he mattered. For Tommy, it was a coach who told him he had potential, a teacher who encouraged him despite his outbursts, a youth worker who wanted to shield him from the cycle of abuse, a girlfriend who saw past his anger to the wounded boy underneath. Each thread of light reached out, but they recoiled, suspicious, hardened, believing kindness itself was a trap. The darkness fed them constant whispers. No one cares. Everyone lies. Violence is survival. Drugs are your only friend. They clung to the lies, even as the lies became their prison. Watching this tore at me more deeply than the attack itself. I had seen their fists, but now I saw their chains. They were not monsters. They were broken children who had never been shown another way. My tears fell hot and unstoppable, and I whispered without meaning to, "They were born into hell." Jesus' reply burned into me, and yet heaven reached for them again and again. The choice was theirs, as it is for all. The dominant emotion in me was compassion. Compassion so overwhelming it nearly broke me. These boys had nearly killed me, yet in that place I wanted to hold them, to tell them they were not beyond hope. The tidbit of truth I learned here: evil rarely begins as malice. It begins as wounds untreated, grief unspoken, trauma unhealed, hurt people, until someone, somewhere, chooses forgiveness and love instead. The cycle rolls on, crushing generation after generation. And I knew then my role in that cycle was about to be tested. The vision did not end with Marcus and Tommy. Instead, it widened, as though the lens of heaven pulled back to show me the pattern that stretched across centuries. I saw faces upon faces, a tapestry of broken children becoming broken adults, and those adults breaking others. The cycle was endless. Abuse, giving birth to anger, anger to bitterness, bitterness to violence. Each wound passed like an inheritance of poison. Hurt people hurt people. The phrase rose inside me not as cliche, but as a spiritual law as unyielding as gravity. I felt it like weight pressing against my chest. If unbroken, this cycle fed the shadows endlessly. The darkness needed no armies, it only needed despair multiplied. Jesus' eyes locked with mine. His sadness was immeasurable, yet even in his grief there was no hopelessness. This is how evil spreads, his presence declared to my spirit. Not because humanity is born wicked, but because pain left unhealed becomes the breeding ground for lies, and every lie that is believed strengthens the chains. The vision shifted again, and I saw households across time. A father, bitter from his own childhood, raising his voice until his son cowered. That son, when grown, carrying the rage into his marriage. A wife hardened by betrayal, withdrawing her love from her children, who then went searching for counterfeit love in destructive places. The cycle fed itself, repeating through generations like a curse whispered from one life to the next. Yet alongside every scene, I also saw flashes of light moments where the cycle could have been broken. A grandmother kneeling in prayer for her children, a neighbor offering kindness at the right moment, a friend extending forgiveness instead of revenge. Each act of love was like a golden sword cutting through the chain, sometimes just one link, sometimes severing it entirely. I understood then that the war was never fought in grand gestures alone, but in the hidden choices of daily life. Do I forgive or cling to the grudge? Do I extend a hand or turn away? Do I speak truth or whisper poison? Every decision either nourished light or fattened the shadows. The emotion that surged through me was responsibility, heavy, sobering, inescapable. I realized that I, too, was part of this chain. If I chose bitterness against my attackers, my hatred would not stop with me. It would ripple outward, touching my family, my friends, my future children, poisoning every bond I carried. My private resentment would become public destruction. And yet, if I chose forgiveness, the ripple could be reversed. Light would multiply instead of darkness. My decision, a single choice, could tip the balance for countless others. That realization nearly overwhelmed me. I was just a teenager. How could my forgiveness carry such weight? Jesus' presence filled me with an answer I didn't want to hear but knew was true. You are not strong enough, but I am. Forgiveness is not something you generate, it is something you receive and release. Let my love flow through you, and the chain breaks. The tidbit of truth branded onto my heart in that moment. Forgiveness is not a feeling, it is a a weapon sharper than steel, brighter than flame, more powerful than any violence humans could inflict. When forgiveness is chosen, even against all instinct, it detonates like a supernova, scattering shadows for miles. I felt the weight of my attackers' lives, the ache of my family's grief, and the whisper of my own wounded pride. And I knew the cycle would either stop with me or continue through me. The visions drew back from Marcus and Tommy until the whole nation lay before me. At first, America looked as I had always seen it: vast highways stretching across plains, cities glowing with neon, churches rising like spires of hope. But then the veil lifted, and I saw beneath the surface the spiritual currents threading through every corner of the land. Churches appeared first, sanctuaries full of people praying, but I saw invisible walls splitting the congregations right down the middle. On one side, worshippers asked God to crush their political enemies. On the other, voices rose with the same hatred but in the opposite direction. Both groups spoke his name, but their prayers were poisoned with division. Shadows slithered between the pews, feeding on anger disguised as righteousness. Jesus' voice shook with grief. My house has become a den of division. They speak of me while harboring the very poison that nailed me to the cross. From the churches, my vision shifted to schools. I saw children as young as 8 absorbing lessons of bitterness, taught to despise others for their skin, their faith, their family's struggles. The classrooms buzzed with whispers from shadowy beings perched at their desks, sowing seeds of hate. Some children resisted, their innocence like a shield of light. Others, already wounded from broken homes, welcomed the lies like old companions. The future of an entire generation trembled before me. Then the vision expanded to the streets of America's cities. Crowds filled the avenues, not with peaceful protest, but with rage. People screamed at each other, fists clenched, faces twisted. The shadows no longer hid, they walked openly, feeding on the fury. Brother against brother, neighbor against neighbor, rage boiling until it erupted in violence. What I saw chilled my soul. This was no longer a political battle or cultural divide. It was spiritual war, and the darkness was growing fat on hatred. The emotion that rose in me was dread, deeper than anything I had ever known. Not the dread of dying because I had already tasted death, but the dread of watching love wither and hate metastasize across a nation. I wanted to turn away, to close my eyes, but Jesus' presence held me firm. You must see, he said without words. You must understand what hangs in the balance. He showed me suburban neighborhoods where families sat together, but were not together. Around the dinner tables, each person's face was lit by the glow of a screen, isolated in their own digital bubble. The shadows moved freely, whispering division into each mind. The father believed his daughter was beyond hope. The mother believed her husband no longer respected her. The children believed their parents were obstacles to happiness. Golden threads of connection thinned, dimmed, almost snapped. And yet I was shown one flicker of hope. A little boy, maybe 7 years old, set down his tablet and asked his father to help him with a puzzle. In that small, simple act, the shadows recoiled and a golden thread blazed between them. The father smiled, really smiled, for the first time in months. The light grew stronger. Jesus pointed toward that fragile flame. There. That is how the tide can turn. One choice to love, one moment of connection, one refusal to bow to isolation. The tidbit of truth carved into me: division is the enemy's feast. Every time we despise, dismiss, or dehumanize one another, the shadows grow stronger. Every time we connect, forgive, or serve, the light multiplies. The war over America's soul is not fought in courtrooms or capitals. It is fought in kitchens, classrooms, and pews. It is fought in the secret places of the heart, where the choice to love or hate tips the scales of history. The dread that filled me was matched by determination. I knew this wasn't just vision, it was warning, and warnings always carried responsibility. The vision narrowed from the nation's streets to the intimacy of family homes, and what I saw pierced me more than riots or divided churches. It was the quiet unraveling happening behind closed doors. Shadows didn't need violence to win, they only needed silence, disconnection, and a slow drift into isolation. I saw families gathered in living rooms, but each heart locked behind glowing screens. The father scrolling news that only fed his anger. The mother numbing herself with endless images of a life she thought she'd never have. The children lost in games and online voices that whispered, "Your parents don't understand you." The house was quiet, but it was not peace. It was the suffocating quiet of disconnection. Shadows wove freely, whispering different lies to each person, convincing them that love had dried up. Then the vision shifted to a dining room table. Plates sat before a family, but no one spoke, each face lit by a device, their golden threads almost invisible. The father's thread was fraying, the mother's dim, the children's nearly snapped. But then something so small it might have gone unnoticed changed everything. The youngest child put his fork down and asked, "Dad, will you help me with this puzzle later?" In that moment, a golden light surged between father and son. The shadows recoiled, hissing into the corners. The father smiled, genuinely smiled, as if remembering who he was. That thread strengthened and reached out, touching the mother, touching the siblings, reweaving what was nearly lost. Jesus whispered into my soul, "One choice to connect can drive back armies of darkness. One decision to put away distractions and turn toward each other builds a fortress of light." I saw more homes, some crumbling under the weight of bitterness, some glowing with resilience because families had chosen intentional practices. One family had a nightly hour without devices, a sacred time of conversation, prayer, laughter. Another family had what they called truth talks, where parents and children sat together to ask, "Does this message bring love or division? Does it lead to hope or despair?" These simple practices became shields that no shadow could pierce. The emotion that overwhelmed me was conviction. I realized how many nights I had sat at home, half present, my eyes on a screen, my heart disengaged. I had thought it harmless, but now I saw it for what it was, a fracture, a weak point the enemy exploited. The tidbit of wisdom I carried. The war over the soul of a nation is won or lost first in the home. Not in rallies or speeches, but in whether fathers sit with their children, whether mothers choose forgiveness over resentment, whether siblings reach for each other instead of their phones. These small choices are the battlegrounds of eternity. The vision pressed deeper. I saw homes where shadows feasted because no one practiced forgiveness. Old arguments sat like cracks in the foundation, and every silence widened them. Then I saw homes where families had a rhythm of confessing failures, forgiving one another, praying together. Those homes shone like citadels, the shadows unable to penetrate. Jesus' voice resounded in me, gentle yet firm. Prepared families will endure the storm. Those who choose connection, truth, forgiveness, and service will become shelters of light when darkness rises. And I knew. What he was showing me was not just a warning, it was a manual for survival. The visions stretched outward like branches of a great tree, and I saw before me not one future but many. Each path unfolded like a timeline, shimmering with possibility, and I understood that what came to pass was not fixed. It was shaped by choices, countless choices made by ordinary people like you and me. On one branch, I saw the cycle of division deepen until it snapped the nation in two. Churches that once preached love became fortresses of ideology, spitting venom instead of grace. Cities burned as neighbors turned on one another, each convinced they were righteous while hatred consumed them. The shadows danced openly in the flames, gorging on bitterness until they blotted out the light. Families fractured completely, children wandering without anchors, entire communities crumbling under rage. That timeline was devastation, not from some foreign power, but from the corrosion of hearts that had chosen hate over love. But on another branch, the light rose. I saw people recognizing the whispers of darkness for what they were lies. I saw them turning instead toward the golden threads woven all around, threads of connection, service, forgiveness. Churches laid down politics and picked up towels to serve the poor. Neighbors who had once screamed at each other came together to rebuild after storms. Families put down devices and lifted each other's faces. Communities learned to disagree without despising. The shadows shrieked, powerless against a people who chose love over division. Jesus' voice filled me. The fate of nations is not decided in courts or capitals, but in the hidden chambers of the heart. Every choice tips the scales. Forgive or resent, serve or ignore, love or hate. These are the real battles. The emotion coursing through me was urgency, an urgency that burned like fire in my chest. I realized the future wasn't some distant inevitability. It was being decided in every text we send, every word we speak at the dinner table, every choice to forgive or harden our hearts. A tidbit of truth seared into me. Despair is the enemy's greatest weapon, convincing people their choices don't matter. But the smallest act of love, helping a neighbor, forgiving a betrayal, teaching a child to pray, carries cosmic weight. The tree of futures faded, but its truth remained. We are all gardeners, planting seeds with every decision. Some seeds grow into shadows that choke the world. Others blossom into light that drives darkness back. Which fruit the world eats tomorrow depends entirely on the seeds we plant today. As the branches dissolved, I saw myself reflected in both timelines. In one, I grew bitter, the attack hardening me until I spread cynicism everywhere I went. In the other, I chose forgiveness, mentoring young men, breaking cycles, building bridges. One path ended in isolation, the other in legacy. Both futures were possible. Which one would be mine depended on my choices. The vision slowed, and Jesus drew my attention to a single thread, thin, trembling, but unbroken. It stretched from my heart to the very boys who had beaten me unconscious. Marcus and Tommy. I recoiled at first. Everything human in me wanted to sever that thread, to declare them my enemies and be done with it. But his gaze would not allow me to turn away. I saw Marcus in a juvenile detention center, sitting alone on a metal cot, shadows clinging to him like parasites. Yet faint strands of light still reached for him. A court appointed therapist who refused to give up, an aunt who prayed daily for his salvation, a chaplain who slid a Bible under his door. And then I saw it, a golden thread reaching straight from me to him, not from what I had already done, but from what I might do. Jesus showed me the truth. My forgiveness could be the key to unlock his chains. Not because he deserved it, but because forgiveness is not about deserving, it's about breaking the cycle. If I chose bitterness, I would join the same current of hate that had shaped him. If I chose forgiveness, I would create a crack in the darkness, a place where light could pour in. Then I saw Tommy, hardened on the outside but inside still the frightened boy trying to shield himself from his father's fists. Shadows told him he was beyond redemption, that he would always be a monster. But golden threads whispered otherwise, his sister's prayers, his coach's belief in him, and one more. Mine. The choice to forgive him would strike at the lie that defined him. The emotion that surged in me was terror, not of them, but of the responsibility placed in my hands. I was only 18. I had been left bleeding on the subway floor, and now Jesus was telling me my decision to forgive or hate would ripple out to affect not only them, but generations. His voice sank into me like fire and water all at once. Forgiveness is not weakness. It is the strongest weapon in the universe. Every act of forgiveness is an explosion of light. It disarms darkness, dismantles lies, and rewrites legacies. I was shown what happens when someone truly forgives. Golden light bursting outward like a supernova, scattering shadows for miles. Families healed. Addicts set free. Chains broken across bloodlines. Forgiveness was not sentiment, it was nuclear, a force more potent than hate could ever be. A tidbit of truth branded on me. Bitterness doesn't only destroy enemies, it devours the one who carries it. If I refused forgiveness, I would become a prisoner myself, feeding the very darkness that almost destroyed me. I wept, because the choice was harder than I wanted to admit. Forgiving meant releasing my right to vengeance, my right to hate. But then Jesus' eyes held me, and I understood. Strength was not required, only willingness. The power to forgive flowed from him, not from me. I whispered in that place, trembling, I am willing. The vision shifted once again, no longer showing me only what was broken, but revealing how families and communities could stand strong when the storm came. It was as if Jesus was giving me a manual, not just a warning. The images unfolded before me with such clarity that I knew I would carry them back like blueprints burned into my soul. I saw homes lit with golden domes of protection. These weren't mansions or bunkers, they were ordinary houses, but they glowed because of what happened inside. Families who prayed together daily, who forgave each other weekly, who spoke blessings even over their enemies, were shielded in light that no shadow could penetrate. Inside those homes, love was practiced like discipline, forgiveness like ritual, and truth like daily bread. Then I was shown a family sitting at their dinner table, all devices put away for one sacred hour each night. They talked, they laughed. Sometimes they simply sat together in silence, but the golden threads between them grew stronger each time. I saw shadows try to enter, but they bounced off the walls of connection like sparks against glass. Jesus whispered, physical devices are not evil, but they have become the enemy's primary weapons of isolation. When families put them down to truly see one another, they build fortresses of light. The vision changed again. I saw families practicing what they called truth talks, where children and parents alike asked, who benefits if I believe this? Does this message bring division or love? These conversations became armor for their minds. The children raised in such homes were nearly immune to lies. Their discernment was too sharp for the shadow's whispers. I was shown sanctuary rooms, simple spaces in homes dedicated only to prayer, stillness, worship. No screens, no noise, just sacred silence. Families stocked these rooms not only with food and water for crises, but with journals of gratitude, letters of love written in advance, songs memorized by heart. In moments of despair, they would find these lifelines and remember they were loved, they were not alone, and darkness had no final word. Communities appeared next. Neighbors working side by side in gardens, sharing food, teaching children to serve others. They had simple codes and systems to ensure truth could not be twisted by lies. They weren't driven by politics or fear, but by the shared commitment to choose love in every circumstance. These communities shone brighter than cities full of neon. The emotion that filled me was hope. For the first time since the subway floor, I felt the fire of hope blaze stronger than fear. The storm would come, yes, but there was a way to stand, a way to overcome. A tidbit of wisdom pierced me here. Preparedness without love is futility. A bunker filled with supplies, but occupied by hatred, is just a tomb. But a small home filled with love becomes a beacon that shelters many. Jesus' voice echoed softly but firmly. Teach them this. Show them that survival is not about walls of stone, but walls of forgiveness, connection, and truth. The storm will test every home, but those who choose love will shine like cities on a hill. The vision faded, and I felt myself being drawn back, the weight of this knowledge pressing into my chest. My mission was clear. I had not been spared just to survive. I had been sent back to testify, to forgive, to warn, and to teach. And now, as I tell you these words, I can still feel the hum of that cosmic observatory, the light of his eyes, the weight of his warning. 14 minutes of death became a lifetime of responsibility. I carry it like fire in my bones. The war over America's soul is not coming, it is here. It plays out in our homes, in our churches, in our quiet choices every single day. Do not believe the lie that your life is too small to matter. Every word you speak, every moment you choose to forgive, every time you put down the device and look into the eyes of the person beside you, you are shifting eternity. You are either feeding the shadows or strengthening the light. There is no neutral ground. I was shown both futures, one where bitterness devours us until the nation burns, another where forgiveness spreads like wildfire, healing generations and rebuilding communities. The choice does not belong to politicians, but to you, to me, to every ordinary soul who dares to choose love. So forgive. Bless those who curse you. Serve the broken. Build homes of connection. Speak truth aloud until lies have no foothold. Prepare your families, not just with food and water, but with stories of faith, practices of love, and rhythms of forgiveness. This is how you survive the storm, and not just survive, but shine. If these words resonate with you, leave an amen in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and share it with at least 3 friends or family members right now. Now is your time to make a difference. Spreading this message is not only an act of love, but also a mission that Jesus himself has entrusted to you.